The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was soft, almost gentle. But it landed like thunder in my chest. I stood there on the porch, suitcase in hand, as Tara closed the front door behind her. My front door. Her voice was calm, clinical. She said they needed privacy now. That I'd overstayed my welcome. I didn't respond, I just looked at her. Looked at the woman my son married, who now thought she could lock me out of the very house I had poured my life into. She didn't see the tremble in my hands. She only saw silence, and mistook it for surrender. She hadn't read the deed. She hadn't looked closely at the name printed there, the name that had never changed. This is not a story about being discarded. This is a story about someone trying to bury me in my own home. And learning too late that I had already written the ending. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that justice doesn't always need to shout to be heard. And tell me below if someone ever mistook your quiet for weakness. My name is Margaret Caldwell. I'm 66 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and a widow. My husband, Harold, passed away 12 years ago after a long illness. We were married for 35 years, and for most of them, we built a life that was modest, but full. He used to call our home the anchor, something solid we could hand down to our son, Daniel. After Harold died, I stayed in that house not just out of habit, but because it held everything I had left of him. Daniel was 22 when his father passed. I helped him pay off his student loans. Sold off the last pieces of jewelry Harold had gifted me so Daniel wouldn't have to carry that burden. I even took on a part-time tutoring job to keep up with the bills while still putting money aside for the house. It was always understood that when Daniel got married, I would stay with them until they could afford their own place. I wasn't there to interfere, just to support them. I imagined Sunday dinners, the pitter-patter of children in the hallway, and a family that stayed close. When he married Tara, I had no reason to doubt her. She was well-spoken, polished, and courteous in all the ways you expect someone to be when they're still new to the family. She called me Mom at first, asked me about Harold, even helped in the garden once or twice. But over time, that warmth grew cool. Tara started making little changes around the house without asking. It began with decor, replacing curtains Harold had picked, removing photo frames from the hallway, changing furniture. I told myself it was natural. She was nesting. Making space her own. Then came the comments. You should really get out more, Margaret. It's not healthy to stay inside all day. Maybe if you joined a group or a class, it would give you something to look forward to. There was a smile behind each sentence. And a push. Away from the dining table, away from conversations, away from decisions. Daniel, who had always been gentle and attentive, seemed distracted more often. I'd bring things up, and he'd nod without listening. When I reminded him that I had paid the last of the mortgage years ago, he barely blinked. Once, I came home to find a contractor measuring the living room walls. Tara said they were thinking of opening up the space. That they wanted to modernize. I remember the quietness that settled into my bones then. The realization that I was not being consulted, only informed. It got worse. They started locking the cabinets where I kept old china and my late husband's letters. My food in the fridge was moved or tossed. My routines were disrupted. I'd wake up to strangers in the house, plumbers, painters, interior decorators, none of whom were introduced to me. One afternoon, I found a real estate brochure folded neatly on the coffee table. I picked it up, turned it over, and found a sticky note in Tara's handwriting. It read, "Charming two-bedroom with senior amenities. Think she'd like this?" I felt it then. That chill. The creeping feeling of being replaced without being asked. And yet I said nothing. I tried to hold on to the illusion. That we were still a family. That they were just settling in. That I was imagining the cold looks and missed dinners. But deep down, I knew. I wasn't being asked to leave. I was being erased. The shift was gradual, but it became impossible to ignore. Tara no longer hid her disdain. She didn't raise her voice or throw tantrums. Instead, she clipped her words short, rolled her eyes when I spoke, and made decisions in my presence as though I weren't standing there. The thermostat in my room was locked from the main panel. When I asked Daniel about it, he said it was a feature of the new system. That the settings were being optimized. I woke each morning to a room chilled with cold air, wrapping myself in Harold's old sweater just to keep from shivering. She began calling my bedroom the guest room. She rearranged furniture to suit her preferences and made comments about the smell of old books. I caught her once with a donation box, quietly gathering trinkets from my shelves. Family photos, a set of figurines Harold had given me on our 20th anniversary. Tara's voice was always measured, sweet even, when she suggested I spend more time outside the house. She started signing me up for community programs without asking. I came home one day to find a printed schedule on my bed. It included yoga, bingo nights, and a walking group for seniors. "This could be good for you," she said, smiling. "Keeps your mind sharp." I felt the corners of my life being swept up and boxed away, like clutter in a house that no longer had room for sentiment. And Daniel, he didn't defend me. He didn't notice. He had grown quiet too, as if living beside Tara required his obedience in exchange for peace. One evening, during a quiet dinner, Tara turned to me and said, "You know, Margaret, it's not sustainable for all three of us to live here forever. Daniel and I want to start a family soon, and we need our space." I sat there, swallowing dry potatoes, forcing my hands to stay still. She continued, "We found a wonderful retirement community not far from here. With shuttle service and everything." Daniel didn't speak. He just stared at his plate. Later that night, I stood in the hallway, staring at the bare wall where our family photos once hung. I opened the hallway closet to find my wedding album placed in a storage bin, labeled in Tara's handwriting, to be sorted. The insult wasn't loud. It was deliberate, quiet, and precise. A few days later, I returned from the grocery store to find my bedroom empty. My mattress was gone. The dresser was moved. Paint cans sat in the corner. Tara was in the doorway, clipboard in hand. "We're converting the room into a nursery," she said, without looking at me. "We thought it would be easier if you stayed in the shed for now, just while renovations are underway." The shed was a converted storage space behind the house. No heating. No real windows. A cot had been placed inside, with an old lamp and a single pillow. I stood there, staring at it, feeling the weight of each breath. Later that night, while the wind hissed through cracks in the walls, I sat on the edge of the cot, my fingers resting on the worn edges of a small file box I'd kept hidden for years. Inside was a folder. Yellowed at the edges. Stamped in blue ink. The deed. The official property deed to the house. I ran my fingers over it slowly. Margaret and Caldwell. Sole owner. No other names listed. Not Daniel. Not Tara. Harold and I had decided, after he passed, not to complicate things with transfers or promises. The house was mine, legally and entirely. I had always planned to hand it over to Daniel when he was ready. But he wasn't ready. They thought I had nowhere to go. That I was powerless. But they had no idea who they were trying to push out. The next morning, I showered in silence and dressed with purpose. I folded the eviction draft I had found weeks ago, tucked it beside the deed in the folder, and slipped it into my handbag. I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I asked Tara if she could watch the laundry while I stepped out. She nodded, distracted by her phone, and mumbled something about dryer sheets. I took the bus into town. 40 minutes of quiet movement and a single transfer later, I stood in front of a law office tucked between a florist and a hardware store. I had looked it up 2 days before, cross-referenced reviews, and called to schedule a meeting. The lawyer was a woman in her 40s named Laura. Calm. Direct. When I handed her the deed, she looked it over carefully, then looked up at me with an expression that hovered between surprise and respect. "You own the house outright," she said. "No co-signers. No transfer documents. No agreements made in writing?" "None," I said. She leaned back in her chair. "Then what they're doing isn't just cruel. It's illegal." We discussed options. A formal notice to cease harassment. Legal enforcement of property boundaries. The potential for police accompaniment if the situation escalated. I asked her to draft a document. I wanted it clear, firm, and undisputable. That afternoon, I also made another visit to Natalie, a woman I once taught in 3rd grade who now worked as a family therapist. We hadn't spoken in years, but she welcomed me like I had just left the classroom yesterday. I told her everything. Slowly. Carefully. Without dramatics. Natalie listened, then asked if I had been documenting the changes. I started when they locked me out of the thermostat, I told her. She helped me organize everything, timestamps, photographs, incident descriptions. She even recorded a statement, should I need support from an outside professional. Back at home, I began observing with intention. I paid attention to what time Tara unplugged the heater in the shed. I noted what food went missing from the fridge. I took photos of the shed's moldy walls, of the cold read thermostat in my bedroom, of every instance I found something removed or discarded. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not even grief. Just stillness. Like a calm before a storm I no longer feared. I watched Tara moving through the house as though it was already hers, and I thought, let her. Let her believe she's one. She would learn soon enough that I had simply been waiting. 3 days later, I waited until Tara had poured her morning coffee and settled at the dining table. Daniel was in the living room, scrolling through his phone, half listening to the morning news. I placed a thick envelope in front of her, quietly, like serving a meal. She looked down at it, eyebrows pinched. "What's this?" "Open it." She peeled it open with one manicured finger and began to read. Her posture shifted almost immediately. The page in her hands was crisp, legal, and unmistakably clear. A cease and desist order. A formal declaration of sole property ownership. Notification of unauthorized occupancy. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Daniel looked up. "What is it?" he asked. I answered without looking at him. "It's a reminder." "Of whose name is on the deed?" There was a pause, long and dense. Tara looked up, eyes sharp now. "You can't be serious." I stood straighter than I had in months. "I am. And I suggest you start packing." The next day, I contacted the local police and requested assistance. It wasn't dramatic. 2 officers arrived, reviewed the documentation, and stood by while I changed the locks. They were polite, professional. One of them asked if I wanted to file for a formal restraining order. I said not yet. But I wanted it on record. Tara paced outside, her voice rising but still keeping its practiced control. "This is insane. You can't just kick us out." "I'm not kicking you out," I said. "I'm reclaiming what you tried to erase." The locks clicked into place with a finality I hadn't felt in years. That night, I slept in my own room with the thermostat set to 72, the air warm against my skin. Over the next week, I contacted a city inspector. He evaluated the shed and deemed it unfit for habitation. A report was filed. A copy was posted to the refrigerator. My niece, an independent journalist, published a reflective essay titled "The Silent Exit," when family becomes a threat to home. It didn't name names, but it painted the picture clearly. Quiet suffering. Emotional manipulation. Legal empowerment. It gained quiet traction online. Messages poured in from strangers who saw themselves in it. Tara attempted damage control. She scheduled a meeting with a lawyer of her own. But the facts were firm. No ownership. No transfer. No leverage. Daniel tried to talk sense into me. "You don't have to go this far," he said. "We can fix this." I looked at him carefully. "You had every chance to fix it. You chose to look away." I gave them 30 days to move out. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I gave them a printed letter and a quiet deadline. This was not vengeance. This was reclamation. The morning they left was gray and windless. A moving truck idled at the curb while Daniel carried out the last few boxes. Tara stood near the porch, arms crossed, wearing sunglasses though the sky held no sun. She didn't look at me. Not once. Daniel lingered at the doorway, keys in hand, unsure of what to say. His voice cracked slightly when he finally spoke. "I didn't think it would come to this." I met his eyes and held them. "It didn't have to." He nodded faintly and stepped off the porch without another word. The truck doors closed behind them. Gravel crunched as they pulled away. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood there and listened to the stillness. Inside, the house breathed differently. The air felt honest again. I walked through the room slowly, touching the walls, running my fingers along the hallway where the family photos used to hang. Later, I took the old album out from storage. I returned it to the shelf in the living room, right where it had always belonged. I made tea. I opened windows. The silence didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt earned. Justice, when it arrives, doesn't need applause. It just needs to be seen. That afternoon, I sat by the window with my tea and watched the sun finally push through the clouds. The warmth across my face felt like the closing of a long-held wound. For a long time, I believed that love meant giving endlessly. That sacrifice was the measure of worth. But I learned that there is a point where giving becomes disappearing. They didn't take everything from me. They only tried to. What they forgot was that the house they tried to claim was not just a place. It was memory. It was endurance. It was the quiet strength of a woman who had built and rebuilt more times than they ever bothered to ask about. I do not hate them. I do not wish them harm. I only wish they remember this, that silence is not the same as weakness, and kindness is not the same as permission. Now, I live in peace. Not because they gave it to me, but because I reclaimed it. Have you ever been pushed aside by someone who thought your time was over? Someone who mistook your patience for passivity? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every one. And if you believe that strength is not loud, that justice doesn't always need to scream to be heard, then hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories like this one, where quiet dignity becomes power, and where those who tried to write us out learn we were the authors all along. Your voice matters. Don't let anyone else hold your pen.